Hello everybody, we made it. My computer decided it was doing updates to something and I'm not sure what, but it was telling me that it was using 100% of something and I was like, oh no, I still haven't got the new book cover up so you can see what the book is that we're reading from, but it's working now, so yay, that's awesome, we're here. So have you got your bottle of water? Have you got your snacks? Oh, are you ready to go? Have you got somewhere comfortable to sit and listen? You don't have to watch me, just sit and listen. That's the way to do it with read aloud books. I'm just going to top up my water bottle from my other water bottle because then it's not quite so big and clunky. Oops. There we go. And the purple one looks better, I think. Oops, that lid won't fit. It's been one of those days. How's your day been? How's your week been? It is Friday after all, and Friday is kind of the end of the working week for most people. Let's see, I'm just going to open up Twitch on my phone so I can see what's going on there, and then we shall be off, shan't we? Chat. And there it is. It's going. Right, I shall type into chat what our Discord server is so you can join us over there afterwards if you want. You can just join us now, but there's no one there at the moment. That's all right. And I shall also type in our YouTube channel. Come on. There it is. There's the Discord notification. And there's the YouTube notification. So we have a Discord server so that you can chat together with any of the other listeners out of hours from when I'm not actually reading to you live. We have a YouTube channel so that if you want to listen to stories that I have read previously, catch up, listen again. If it's something that you've heard before and you just wanted to have another listen because it was a favourite story or you missed a bit, maybe you had to go away and stop listening for a while, you can go and have a listen to the story. So today is Friday in New Zealand, so therefore it's Formal Friday, hence the little mini tiara, and I'm wearing my moonstone necklace and earrings because we're reading a Victorian fantasy. What else would you wear? Oh, also a bit of extra bling on the fingers. Doesn't matter. So here we go. We are going to be reading our new story, which is called The Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald. Now this is by the same chap who wrote the previous book, The Princess and the Goblin, and it's a sequel to it. So Curdie was the young miner that we got to know in The Princess and the Goblin, who helped to save the day and the princess, and so this book is The Princess and Curdie, and it's a continuation of the other story. Remember the very last chapter I read, it had a little bit at the end that was like a conversation between the author and his readers saying, but we want to know what happens, we want to know what else happens in their lives. So that's what this story is, and I'm reading, in case you're wondering, on a first generation iPad mini. It's not great for anything except for reading from, but thankfully we can still read from it, so it's nice to not have it wasted. So we are reading The Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald, and we are starting at chapter 1, and this one, the digital version, has some lovely illustrations, which I am, ooh, that's so bright. There you go, you kind of see it there when I turn the screen away. And it also has some little illustrations. I'm just seeing if I can find you. There's the cover, which we've got up in that top right hand corner of our stream screen, and it has some nice little dividing artwork, which they used to do sometimes in books back in the Victorian era. See that illustrated, oops, that illustrated letter C there. They used to do those at the beginning of chapters. So it's a lot of fun actually reading old books and seeing the ways they used to do different things, like which page, whether it was a left-hand page or a right-hand page, had the title of the book, which one had the name of the author, because some of them used to do that, not just the number of the page at the bottom of the page. So we shall start now reading The Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald, and we're starting with chapter 1, which is called The Mountain. Is it the same mountain? We'll see. Curdie was the son of Peter, the miner. He lived with his father and mother in a cottage. I'll just move the microphone closer and try not to clang the keyboard. Lived with his father and mother in a cottage built on a mountain, and he worked with his father inside the mountain. A mountain is a strange and awful thing. In old times, without knowing so much of their strangeness and awfulness as we do, people were yet more afraid of mountains, but then somehow they had not come to see how beautiful they are, as well as awful, and they hated them. And what people hate, they must fear. Now that we have learned to look at them with admiration, perhaps we do not always feel quite awe enough of them. To me, they are beautiful terrors. I'm just going to give you an aside here. Yes, I think in this day and age we have lost the ability to be in awe of something, to be filled with awe, which is a certain type of fear almost. There are too many people who think, oh, it's a nice day, I'll go and climb up that mountain or rock or whatever, without enough skills and without enough awe for the greatness of what they're dealing with, that nature can be so much more powerful than us, that we don't stay in control of absolutely everything that's around us when we're out in the natural world. So I think he has a good point here. To me, they are beautiful terrors. I will try to tell you what they are. They are portions of the heart of the earth that have escaped from the dungeon down below and rushed up and out. For the heart of the earth is a great wallowing mass, not of blood, as in the hearts of men and animals, but of glowing hot, melted metals and stones. And as our hearts keep us alive, so that great lump of heat keeps the earth alive. It is a huge power of buried sunlight, that is what it is. Now think. Out of that cauldron where all the bubbles would be as big as the Alps if it could get room for its boiling, certain bubbles have bubbled out and escaped, up and away, and there they stand in the cool, cold sky, mountains. Think of the change, and you will no more wonder that there should be something awful about the very look of a mountain. From the darkness, for where the light has nothing to shine upon, it is much the same as darkness. From the heat, from the endless tumult of boiling unrest, up with a sudden heavenward shoot into the wind and the cold and the starshine and a cloak of snow that lies like ermine above the blue-green mail of the glaciers, and the great sun, their grandfather, up there in the sky, and their little old cold aunt, the moon, that comes wandering about the house at night, and everlasting stillness, except for the wind that turns the rocks and caverns into a roaring organ for the young archangels that are studying how to let out the pent-up praises of their hearts, and the molten music of the streams rushing ever from the bosoms of the glaciers fresh born. Think, too, of the change in their own substance, no longer molten and soft, heaving and glowing, but hard and shining and cold. Think of the creatures scampering about and burrowing in it, and the birds building their nests upon it, and the trees growing out of its sides like hair to clothe it, and the lovely grass in the valleys, and the gracious flowers at the very edge of its armour of ice, like the rich embroidery of the garments below, and the rivers galloping down the valleys in a tumult of white and green. And along with all these, think of the terrible precipices down which the traveller may fall and be lost, and the frightful gulfs of blue air cracked in the glaciers, and the dark, profound lakes covered like little Arctic oceans with floating lumps of ice, all this outside the mountain. But the inside, who shall tell what lies there? Caverns of the awfullest solitude, their walls miles thick, sparkling with ores of gold or silver, copper or iron, tin or mercury, studded perhaps with precious stones, perhaps a brook with eyeless fish in it, running, ceaseless, cold and babbling, through banks crusted with carbuncles and golden topazes, or over a gravel of which some of the stones are rubies and emeralds, perhaps diamonds and sapphires, who can tell? And whoever can't tell is free to think, all waiting to flash, waiting for millions of ages, ever since the earth flew off from the sun, a great blot of fire and beginning to cool. Then Then there are caverns full of water, numbing cold, fiercely hot, hotter than any boiling water. From some of these the water cannot get out, and from others it runs in channels as the blood in the body, little veins bringing it down from the ice above into the great caverns of the mountain's heart, whence the arteries let it out again, gushing in pipes and clefts and ducts of all shapes and kinds, through and through its bulk until it springs new-born to the light, and rushes down the mountainside in torrents, and down the valleys and rivers, down, down, rejoicing to the mighty lungs of the world, that is the sea, where it is tossed in storms and cyclones, heaved up in billows, twisted in waterspouts, dashed to mist upon rocks, beaten by millions of tails and breathed by millions of gills, whence at last, melted into vapour by the sun, it is lifted up pure into the air, and borne by the servant winds back to the mountain tops and the snow, the solid ice, and the molten stream. Well, when the heart of the earth has thus come rushing up among her children, bringing with it gifts of all that she possesses, then straightway will it rush her children, straightway into it rush her children to see what they can find there, with pickaxe and spade and crowbar, with boring chisel and blasting powder, they force their way back. Is it to search for what toys they may have left in their long-forgotten nurseries? Hence the mountains that lift their heads into the clear air, and are dotted over with the dwellings of men, are tunnelled and bored in the darkness of their bosoms by the dwellers in the houses which they hold up to the sun and air. Curdie and his father were of these. Their busyness was to bring to light hidden things. They sought silver in the rock, and found it, and carried it out. Of the many other precious things in their mountain, they knew little or nothing. Silver ore was what they were sent to find, and in darkness and danger they found it. But oh, how sweet was the air on the mountain face when they came out at sunset, to go home to wife and mother. They did breathe deeply then. The mines belonged to the king of the country, and the miners were his servants, working under his overseers and officers. He was a real king, that is, one who ruled for the good of his people, and not to please himself. And he wanted the silver not to buy rich things for himself, but to help him to govern the country, and pay the armies that defended it from certain troublesome neighbours, and the judges whom he set to portion out righteousness amongst the people, that so they might learn it themselves, and come to do without judges at all. Nothing that could be got from the heart of the earth could have been put to better purpose than the silver the king's miners got for him. There were people in the country who, when it came into their hands, degraded it by locking it up in a chest. And then it grew diseased, and it was called mammon, and bred all sorts of quarrels. But when first it left the king's hands, it never made any but friends, and the air of the world kept it clean. About a year before this story began, a series of very remarkable events had just ended. I will narrate as much of them as will serve to show the tops of the roots of my tree. Upon the mountain, on one of its many claws, stood a grand old house, half farmhouse, half castle, belonging to the king, and there his only child, the Princess Irene, had been brought up till she was nearly 9 years old, and would doubtless have continued much longer, but for the strange events to which I have referred. At that time the hollow places of the mountain were inhabited by creatures called goblins, who for various reasons and in various ways made themselves troublesome to all, but to the little princess dangerous. Mainly by the watchful devotion and energy of Curdie, however, their designs had been utterly defeated and made to recoil upon themselves to their own destruction, so that now there were very few of them left alive. And the miners did not believe there was a single goblin remaining in the whole inside of the mountain. The king had been so pleased with the boy, that, then approaching 13 years of age, that when he carried away his daughter he asked him to accompany them, but he was still better pleased with him when he found that he preferred staying with his father and mother. He was a right good king, and knew that the love of a boy who would not leave his father and mother to be made a great man was worth 10,000 offers to die for his sake, and would prove so when the right time came. For his father and mother, they would have given him up without a grumble, for they were just as good as the king, and he and they perfectly understood each other. But in this matter, not seeing that he could do anything for the king which one of his numerous attendants could not do as well, Curdie felt that it was for him to decide. So the king took a kind farewell of them all, and rode away with his daughter on the horse before him. A gloom fell upon the mountain and the ministers when she was gone, and Curdie did not whistle for a whole week. As for his verses, there was no occasion to make any now. He had made them only to drive away the goblins, and they were all gone. A good riddance. Only the princess was gone too. He would rather have had things as they were, except for the princess's sake. But whoever is diligent will soon be cheerful, and though the miners missed the household of the castle, yet they managed to get on without them. Peter and his wife, that's Curdie's father and mother, however, were troubled with the fancy that they had stood in the way of their boy's good fortune. It would have been such a fine thing for him, and them too, they thought, if he had ridden with the good king's train. How beautiful he looked, they said, when he rode the king's own horse through the river that the goblins had sent out of the hill. He might soon have been a captain, they did believe. The good, kind people did not reflect that the road to the next duty is the only straight one, or that for their fancied good we should never wish our children or friends to do what we would not do ourselves if we were in their position. We must accept righteous sacrifices as well as make them. That's a good point, and that's the end of the chapter. So I am going to have a drink of water and just shut a door that's adjoining this room so that we have a little bit more quiet. Stay right there. I shall be back. You need to have your water and maybe have a snack. Maybe get your cushion nice and comfy. Maybe get the blanket if it's cold where you live. I'll be back in a moment. And I'm back. There you go. So, I didn't have my drink of water because I was shutting the door. That's better. So, The Princess and Curdie, Chapter 2. Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald, in case you want to look it up. Chapter 2, The White Pigeon. Oh, get my chair so it's not squeaking. It's still squeaking. Chapter 2, The White Pigeon. When in the winter they had had their supper and sat about the fire, or when in the summer they lay on the border of the rock-margined stream that ran through their little meadow close by the door of their cottage, issuing from the far-up whiteness, often folded in clouds, Curdie's mother would not seldom lead the conversation to one particular personage said and believed to have been much concerned in the late issue of events. That's a very complicated way of saying that Curdie's mother sometimes would talk about a particular person who was involved in what had happened previously. That personage was the great-great-grandmother of the princess, of whom the princess had often talked, but whom neither Curdie nor his mother had ever seen. So the first book started when Irene was 7, but it sounds like it finished when she was 9, and I hadn't realised that she was 9 by the time we got to when the goblins were invading. So she's a little older now. So where did we get up to? There was none no, I've missed a little bit. I must have tapped the page. I've gone on to the next page. No wonder I couldn't find it. That personage was the great-great-grandmother of the princess, of whom the princess had often talked, but whom neither Curdie nor his mother had ever seen. Curdie could indeed remember, although already it looked more like a dream than he could account for, if it had really taken place, how the princess had once led him up many stairs to what she called a beautiful room in the top of the tower, where she went through all the, the behaviour of presenting him to her grandmother, talking now to her and now to him, while all the time he saw nothing but a bare garret, that's an attic, a heap of musty straw, a sunbeam, and a withered apple. Lady, he would have declared before the king himself, young or old, there was none, except the princess herself, who was certainly vexed that he could not see what she at least believed she saw. And for his mother, she had once seen, long before Curdie was born, a certain mysterious light of the same description with one Irene spoke of, calling it her grandmother's moon. And Curdie himself had seen this same light shining from above the castle, just as the king and the princess were taking their leave. Since that time, neither had seen or heard anything that could be supposed connected with her. Strangely enough, however, nobody had seen her go away. If she was such an old lady, she could hardly be supposed to have set out alone and on foot when all the house was asleep. Still, away she must have gone, for of course if she was so powerful, she would always be about the princess, to take care of her. But as Curdie grew older, he doubted more and more whether Irene had not been talking of some dream she had taken for reality. He had heard it said that children could not always distinguish between dreams and actual events. At the same time, there was his mother's testimony. What was he to do with that? His mother, through whom he had learned everything, could hardly be imagined by her own dutiful son to have mistaken a dream for a fact of the waking world. So he rather shrunk from thinking about it, and the less he thought about it, the less he was inclined to believe it when he did think about it, and therefore, of course, the less inclined to talk about it to his father and mother. For although his father was one of those men who, for one word they say, think 20 thoughts, Curdie was well assured that he would rather doubt his own eyes than his wife's testimony. There were no doubts to whom he could have talked to about it. There were no others to whom he could have talked about it. The miners were a mingled company, some good, some not so good, some rather bad. None of them so good or so bad as they might have been. Curdie liked most of them and was a favourite with all, but they knew very little about the upper world and what might or might not take place there, because they spent all their time in the mountain. They knew silver from copper ore, they understood the underground way of things, and they could look very wise with their lanterns in their hands, searching after this or that sign of ore, or for some mark to guide their way in the hollows of the earth. But as to great-great-grandmothers, they would have mocked him all the rest of his life for the absurdity of not being absolutely certain that the solemn belief of his father and mother was nothing but ridiculous nonsense. Why, to them the very word great-great-grandmother would have been a week's laughter. I am not sure that they were able quite to believe that there were such persons as great-great-grandmothers. They had never seen one. They were not companions to give the best of help towards progress. And as Curdie grew, he grew at this time faster in body than in mind, with the usual consequence that he was getting rather stupid. One of the chief signs of which was that he believed less and less of things he had never seen. At the same time, I do not think that he was ever so stupid as to imagine that this was a sign of superior faculty and strength of mind. Still, he was becoming more and more a miner, and less a man of the upper world, where the wind blew. On his way to and from the mine, he took less and less notice of bees and butterflies, moths and dragonflies, the flowers and the brooks and the clouds. He was gradually changing into a commonplace man. There was this difference between the growth of some human beings and that of others. In the one case it is a continuous dying, in the other a continuous resurrection. One of the latter sort comes at length to know at once whether a thing is true. The moment it comes before him, one of the former class grows more and more afraid of being taken in, so afraid of it that he takes himself in altogether and comes at length to believe in nothing but his dinner. To be sure of a thing with him is to have it between his teeth. Curdie was not in a very good way then, at this time. His father and mother had, it is true, no fault to find with him, and yet neither of them was ready to sing when the thought of him came up. There must be something wrong when a mother catches herself sighing over the time when her boy was in petticoats, or the father looks sad when he thinks how he used to carry him on his shoulder. The boy should enclose and keep as his life the old child at the heart of him, and never let it go. He must still, to be a right man, be his mother's darling, and more, his father's pride, and more. The child is not meant to die, but to be forever fresh born. Keeping the child within us, that keeps us fresh and alive and inquisitive. Curdie had made himself a bow and some arrows, and was teaching himself to shoot with them. One evening in the early summer, as he was walking home from the mine with them in his hand, a light flashed across his eyes. He looked, and there was a snow-white pigeon settling on a rock in front of him, in the red light of the level sun. There it fell at once to work with one of its wings, in which a feather or two had got some sprays twisted, causing a certain roughness unpleasant to the fastidious creature of the air. It was indeed a lovely being, and Curdie thought how happy it must be flitting through the air with a flash, a live bolt of light. For a moment he became so one with the bird that he seemed to feel both its bill and its feathers as the one adjusted the other to fly again, and his heart swelled with the pleasure of its involuntary sympathy. Another moment and it would have been aloft in the waves of rosy light. It was just bending its little legs to spring. That moment it fell on the path, broken-winged and bleeding, from Curdie's cruel arrow. With a gush of pride at his skill and pleasure at its success, he ran to pick up his prey. I must say for him, he picked it up gently. Perhaps it was the beginning of his repentance, but when he had the white thing in his hands, its whiteness stained with another red than that of the sunset flood in which it had been revelling. Ah, God, who knows the joy of a bird, the ecstasy of a creature that has neither storehouse nor barn? When he held it, I say, in his victorious hands, the winged thing looked up in his face, and with such eyes, asking what was the matter, and where the red sun had gone, and the clouds, and the wind of its flight. Then they closed, but to open again presently with the same questions in them, and so they closed and opened several times, but always when they opened, their look was fixed on his. It did not once flutter or try to get away, it only throbbed and bled and looked at him. Curdie's heart began to grow very large in his bosom. What could it mean? It was nothing but a pigeon, and why should he not kill a pigeon? But the fact was that not till this very moment had he ever known what a pigeon was. A good many discoveries of a similar kind have to be made by most of us. Once more it opened its eyes, then closed them again, and its throbbing ceased. Curdie gave a sob. Its last look reminded him of the princess. He did not know why. He remembered how hard he had laboured to set her beyond danger, and yet what dangers she had had to encounter for his sake. They had been saviours to each other, and what had he done now? He had stopped saving and had begun killing. What had he been sent into the world for? Surely not to be a death to its joy and loveliness. He had done the thing that was contrary to gladness. He was a destroyer. He was not the Curdie he had been meant to be. Then the underground waters gushed from the boy's heart, and with the tears came the remembrance that a white pigeon, just before the princess went away with her father, came from somewhere, yes, from the grandmother's lamp, and flew round the king and Irene and himself, and then flew away. This might be that very pigeon. Horrible to think! And if it wasn't, yet it was a white pigeon, the same as it. And if she kept a great many pigeons, and white ones, as Irene had told him, then whose pigeon could he have killed but the grand old princess's? Suddenly everything around him seemed against him. The red sunset stung him, the rocks frowned at him, the sweet wind that had been laving his face, washing his face, as he walked up the hill, dropped as if he weren't fit to be kissed any more. Was the whole world going to cast him out? Would he have to stand there forever not knowing what to do, with the dead pigeon in his hand? Things looked bad indeed. Was the whole world going to make a work about a pigeon, a white pigeon? The sun went down. The great clouds gathered over the west and shortened the twilight. The wind gave a howl and then lay down again. The clouds gathered thicker. Then came a rumbling. He thought it was thunder. It was a rock that fell inside the mountain. A goat ran past him down the hill, followed by a dog sent to fetch him home. He thought they were goblin creatures, and trembled. He used to despise them, and still he held the dead pigeon tenderly in his hand. It grew darker and darker. An evil something began to move in his heart. "What a fool I am," he said to himself. Then he grew angry and was just going to throw the bird from him and whistle, when a brightness shone all round him. He lifted his eyes and saw a great globe of light, like silver at the hottest heat. He had once seen silver run from the furnace. It shone from somewhere above the roofs of the castle. It must be the great old princess's moon. Oh, could she be there? Of course she was not there. He had asked the whole household, and nobody knew anything about her or her globe either. It couldn't be. And yet, what did that signify, when there was the white globe shining, and here was the dead white bird in his hand? That moment the pigeon gave a little flutter. "It's not dead!" cried Curdie, almost with a shriek. The same instant he was running full speed towards the castle, never letting his heels down lest he should shake the poor wounded bird. And that's the end of that chapter. Goodness me, I think he's actually having to rediscover his heart, the child within him. Go on, your time for water too. Don't forget, you're meant to have your water now. Right, we shall carry on. Oh, it's probably because I picked up the cat earlier on. He has very, very, very fine fluff. And sometimes he leaves bits on you and it makes you itchy. You don't think it's there because it's so fine. Anyway, we shall carry on. The Princess and the Curdie by George MacDonald, Chapter 3, The Mistress of the Silver Moon. When Curdie reached the castle and ran into the little garden in front of it, there stood the door wide open. This was what he had hoped for what could he have said if he had had to knock at it? Those whose business it is to open doors so often mistake and shut them. But the woman now in charge often puzzled herself greatly to account for the strange fact that however often she shut the door, which, like the rest, she took a great deal of unnecessary trouble to do, she was certain the next time she went to it to find it open. I speak now of the great front door, of course. The back door she as persistently kept wide. If people could only go in by that, she said, she would then know what sort they were and what they wanted. But she would neither have known what sort Curdie was, nor what he wanted, and would assuredly have denied him admittance, for she knew nothing of who he was in the tower, of who was in the tower. So the front door was left open for him, and in he walked. But where to go next he could not tell. It was not quite dark. A dull, shineless twilight filled the place. All he knew was that he must go up, and that proved enough for the present, for there he saw the great staircase rising before him. When he reached the top of it, he knew there must be more stairs yet, for he could not be near the top of the tower. Indeed, by the situation of the stair, he must be a good way from the tower itself, but those who work well in the depths more easily understand the heights, for indeed in their true nature they are one and the same. Mines are in mountains, and Curdie, from knowing the ways of the king's mines, and being able to calculate his whereabouts in them, was now able to find his way about the king's house. He knew its outside perfectly, and now his business was to get his notion of the inside right with the outside. So he shut his eyes and made a picture of the outside of it in his mind. Then he came in at the door of the picture, and yet kept the picture before him all the time, for you can do that kind of thing in your mind, and took every turn of the stair over again, always watching to remember every time he turned his face how the tower lay, and then when he came to himself at the top where he stood, he knew exactly where it was, and walked at once in the right direction. On his way, however, he came to another stair, and up that he went, of course, watching still at every turn how the tower must lie. At the top of this stair was yet another. They were the stairs up which the princess ran first, without knowing it. She was on her way to find her great-great-grandmother. At the top of the second stair he could go no further, and must therefore set out again to find the tower, which, as it rose far above the rest of the house, must have the last of its stairs inside itself. Having watched every turn to the very last, he still knew quite well in what direction he must go to find it, so he left the stair and went down a passage that led, if not exactly towards it, yet nearer it. This passage was rather dark, for it was very long, with only one window at the end. And although there were doors on both sides of it, they were all shut. That's exactly how it was when the princess had found it. At the distant window glimmered the chill east, with a few feeble stars in it, and the light was dreary and old, growing brown, and looking as if it were thinking about the day that was just gone. Presently he turned into another passage, which also had a window at the end of it, and in at that window shone all that was left of the sunset, a few ashes, with here and there a little touch of warmth. It was nearly as sad as the east, only there was one difference. It was very plainly thinking of tomorrow. But at present Curdie had nothing to do with today or tomorrow. His business was with the bird, and the tower where dwelt the grand old princess to whom it belonged. So he kept on his way, still eastward, and came to yet another passage, which brought him to a door. He was afraid to open it without first knocking. He knocked, but heard no answer. He was answered nevertheless, for the door gently opened, and there was a narrow stair, and so steep that, big lad as he was, he too, like Princess Irene before him, found his hands needful for the climbing. And it was a long climb, but he reached the top at last, a little landing, with a door in front and one on each side. Which should he knock at? As he hesitated, he heard the noise of a spinning wheel. He knew it at once, because his mother's spinning wheel had been his governess long ago, and still taught him things. It was the spinning wheel that first taught him to make verses, and to sing, and to think whether all was right inside him, or at least it had helped him in all these things. Hence it was no wonder he should know a spinning wheel when he heard it sing, even though, as the bird of paradise to other birds, was the song of that wheel to the song of his mother's. The difference was remarkable. He stood listening, so entranced that he forgot to knock, and the wheel went on, spinning in his brain songs and tales and rhymes, till he was almost asleep as well as dreaming, for sleep does not always come first. But suddenly came the thought of the poor bird, which had been lying motionless in his hand all the time, and that woke him up, and at once he knocked. "Come in, Curdie," said a voice. Curdie shook. It was getting rather awful. The heart, that had never much heeded any army of goblins, trembled at the soft word of invitation. But then there was the red-spotted white thing in his hand. He dared not hesitate, though. Gently he opened the door through which the sound came, and what did he see? Nothing at first, except a great sloping shaft of moonlight that came in at a high window and rested on the floor. He stood and stared at it, forgetting to shut the door. "Why don't you come in, Curdie?" said the voice. "Did you never see moonlight before?" "Never without a moon," said Curdie, in a trembling tone, but gathering courage. "Certainly not," replied the voice, which was thin and quavering. "I never saw moonlight without a moon." "But there is no moon outside," said Curdie. "Ah, but you're inside now," said the voice. The answer did not satisfy Curdie, but the voice went on. "There are more moons than you know of, Curdie. Where there is one sun there are many moons, and of many sorts. Come in and look out of my window, and you will soon satisfy yourself that there is no moon looking in at it." The gentleness of the voice made Curdie remember his manners. He shut the door and drew a step or two nearer to the moonlight. All the time the sound of the spinning wheel had been going on, and Curdie now caught sight of the wheel. On it was such a thin, delicate thing, reminding him of a spider's web in a hedge. It stood in the middle of the moonlight, and it seemed as if the moonlight had nearly melted it away. A step nearer he saw, with a start, 2 little hands at work on it. And then at last, in the shadow on the other side of the moonlight, which came like a river between, he saw the form to which the hands belonged, a small, withered creature, so old that no age would have seemed too great to write under her picture, seated on a stool beyond the spinning wheel, which looked very large beside her, but, as I said, very thin, like a long-legged spider holding up its own web, which was the round wheel itself. She sat crumpled together, a filmy thing that seemed a puff would blow away, more like the body of a fly the big spider had sucked empty and left hanging in his web than anything else I can think of. When Curdie saw her, he stood still again, a good deal in wonder, a very little in reverence, a little in doubt, and I must add a little in amusement at the odd look of the old marvel. Her grey hair mixed with the moonlight so that he could not tell where the one began and the other ended. Her crooked back bent forward over her chest, her shoulders nearly swallowed up her head between them, and her 2 little hands were just like the grey claws of a hen scratching at the thread, to which Curdie was, of course, invisible across the moonlight. Indeed, Curdie laughed within himself just a little at the sight, and when he thought of how the princess used to talk about her huge great old grandmother, he laughed more. But at that moment the little lady leaned forward into the moonlight, and Curdie caught a glimpse of her eyes, and all the laugh went out of him. "What do you come here for, Curdie?" she said as gently as before. Then Curdie remembered that he stood there as a culprit, and worst of all, as one who had his confession yet to make. There was no time to hesitate over it. "Oh, ma'am, see here," he said, and advanced a step or two, holding out the dead pigeon. "What have you got there?" she asked. Again Curdie advanced a few steps and held out his hand with the pigeon, that she might see what it was in the moonlight. The moment the rays fell upon it, the pigeon gave a faint flutter. The old lady put out her old hands and took it and held it to her bosom and rocked it, murmuring over it as if it were a sick baby. When Curdie saw how distressed she was, he grew sorrier still and said, "I didn't mean to do any harm, ma'am. I didn't think of it being yours." "Ah, Curdie, if it weren't mine, what would become of it now?" she returned. "You say you didn't mean any harm. Did you mean any good, Curdie?" "No," answered Curdie. "Remember then that whoever does not mean good is always in danger of harm. But I try to give everybody fair play, and those that are in the wrong are in far more need of it always than those who are in the right. They can afford to do without it. Therefore I say to you that when you shot that arrow, you did not know what a pigeon is. Now that you do know, you are sorry. It is very dangerous to do things you don't know about." "But please, ma'am, I don't mean to be rude or to contradict you," said Curdie, "but if a body has never to do anything but what he knew to be good, he would have to live half his life doing nothing." "There you are much mistaken," said the old quavering voice. "How little you must have thought. Why, you don't seem even to know the good of the things that you are constantly doing. Now don't mistake me. I don't mean you are good for doing them. It is a good thing to eat your breakfast, but you don't fancy it is very good of you to do it. The thing is good, not you." Curdie laughed. "There are a great many more good things than bad things to do. Now tell me what bad things you have done today, besides this sore hurt to my little white friend." While she talked, Curdie had sunk into a sort of reverie in which he hardly knew whether it was the old lady or his own heart that spoke, and when she asked him that question, he was at first very much inclined to consider himself a very good fellow on the whole. "I really don't think I did anything else that was very bad at all today. That was very bad all day," he said to himself, but at the same time he could not honestly feel that he was worth standing up for. All at once a light seemed to break in upon his mind, and he woke up, and there was the withered little atomy of the old lady on the other side of the moonlight, and there was the spinning wheel singing on and on in the middle of it. "I know, ma'am. I know now, ma'am. I understand now," he said. "Thank you, ma'am, for spinning it into me with your wheel. I see now that I have been doing wrong the whole day, and such a many day besides. Indeed, I don't know when I ever did right, and yet it seems as if I had done right some time, and had forgotten how. When I killed your bird, I did not know I was doing wrong, just because I was always doing wrong, and the wrong had soaked all through me." "What wrong were you doing all day, Curdie? It is better to come to the point, you know," said the old lady, and her voice was even gentler than before. "I was doing the wrong of never wanting or trying to be better. And now I see that I have been letting things go as they would for a long time. Whatever came into my head, I did, and whatever didn't come into my head, I didn't do, and I never sent anything away, and never looked out for anything to come. I haven't been attending to my mother, or my father either. And now I think of it, I know I have often seen them looking troubled, and I have never asked them what was the matter. And now I see too that I did not ask because I suspected it had something to do with me and my behaviour, and didn't want to hear the truth. And I know I have been grumbling at my work and doing 100 other things that are wrong." "You have got it, Curdie," said the old lady in a voice that sounded almost as if she had been crying. "When people don't care to be better, they must be doing everything wrong. I am so glad you shot my bird." "Ma'am," exclaimed Curdie, "how can you be?" "Because it has brought you to see what sort you were when you did it, and what sort you will grow to be again, only worse, if you don't mind." That means pay attention, if you don't pay attention. "Now that you are sorry, my poor bird will be better. Look up, my dovey." The pigeon gave a flutter, and spread out one of its red-spotted wings across the old woman's bosom. "I will mend the little angel," she said, "and in a week or two it will be flying again, so you may ease your heart about the pigeon." "Oh, thank you," cried Curdie. "I don't know how to thank you." "Then I will tell you. There is only one way I care for. Do better, and grow better, and be better, and never kill anything without a good reason for it. Ma'am, I will go and fetch my bow and arrows, and you shall burn them for yourself." "I have no fire that would burn your bow and arrows, Curdie." "Then I promise you to burn them all under my mother's porridge pot tomorrow morning." No, Curdie, keep them and practice them every day, and grow a good shot. There are plenty of bad things that want killing, and a day will come when they will prove useful. But I must see first whether you will do as I tell you." "That I will," cried Curdie. "What is it, ma'am?" "Only something not to do," answered the old lady. "If you should hear anyone speak about me, never to laugh or make fun of me." "Oh, ma'am," exclaimed Curdie, shocked that she should think such a request needful. Stop," she went on. "People hereabout sometimes tell very odd, and in fact ridiculous stories, of an old woman who watches what is going on, and occasionally interferes. They mean me, though what they say is often great nonsense. Now what I want of you is not to laugh or side with them in any way, because they will take that to mean that you don't believe there is any such person a bit more than they do." "Now that would not be the case, would it, Curdie?" "No, indeed, ma'am, I've seen you." The old woman smiled very oddly. "Yes, you've seen me," she said, "but mind," she continued, "I don't want you to say anything. Only hold your tongue, and not seem to side with them." "That will be easy," said Curdie. "Now I've seen you with my very own eyes, ma'am." "Not so easy as you think, perhaps," said the old lady with another curious smile. "I want to be your friend," she added after a little pause, "but I don't quite know yet whether you will let me." "Indeed I will, ma'am," said Curdie. "That is for me to find out," she rejoined, with yet another strange smile. "In the meantime, all I can say is, come to me again when you find yourself in any trouble, and I will see what I can do for you. Only the canning depends on yourself. I am greatly pleased with you for bringing me my pigeon." Oh, the canning. Can. Doing it. "I am very pleased with you for bringing me my pigeon, doing your best to set right what you did wrong." As she spoke, she held out her hand to him, and when he took it, she made use of his to help herself up from her stool, and when or how it came about, Curdie could not tell. The same instant she stood before him, a tall, strong woman, plainly very old, but as grand as she was old, and only rather severe-looking. Every trace of the decrepitude and witheredness she showed as she hovered like a film about her wheel had vanished. Her hair was very white, but it hung about her head in great plenty, and shone like silver in the moonlight. Straight as a pillar she stood before the astonished boy, and the wounded bird had now spread out both its wings across her bosom like some great mystical ornament of frosted silver. "Oh, now I can never forget you," cried Curdie. "I see now what you really are." "Did I not tell you the truth when I sat at my wheel?" said the old lady. "Yes, ma'am," answered Curdie. "I can do no more than tell you the truth now," she rejoined. "It is a bad thing indeed to forget one who has told us the truth. Now go." Curdie obeyed and took a few steps towards the door. "Please, ma'am, what am I to call you?" he was going to say, but when he turned to speak, he saw nobody. Whether she was there or not, he could not tell. However, for the moonlight had vanished, and the room was utterly dark. A great fear, such as he had never known before, came upon him and almost overwhelmed him. He groped his way to the door and crawled down the stair, in doubt and anxiety as to how he should find his way out of the house in the dark, and the stair seemed ever so much longer than when he came up. Nor was that any wonder, for down and down he went until at length his foot struck on a door, and when he rose and opened it, he found himself under the starry, moonless sky at the foot of the tower. He soon discovered the way out of the garden, with which he had some acquaintance already, and in a few minutes was climbing the mountain with a solemn and cheerful heart. It was rather dark, but he knew the way well. As he passed the rock from which the poor pigeon fell wounded with his arrow, a great joy filled his heart at the thought that he was delivered from the blood of the little bird, and he ran the next 100 yards at full speed up the hill. Some dark shadows passed him. He did not even care to think what they were, but let them run. When he reached home, he found his father and mother waiting his supper for him. And that's the end of that chapter. And I shall read the next one, but I shall have a drink of water first. And you? Will you have a drink of water as well? Right, and we shall continue. The Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald, Chapter 4. I'll just stop my chair from rocking. It goes too far back if I have it unlocked. Chapter 4. Curdie's Father and Mother. The eyes of the fathers and mothers are quick to read their children's looks, and when Curdie entered the cottage, his parents saw at once that something unusual had taken place. When he said to his mother, "I beg your pardon for being so late," there was something in the tone beyond the politeness that went to her heart, for it seemed to come from the place where all lovely things were born before they began to grow in this world. When he sat When he set his father's chair to the table, an attention he had not shown him for a long time, Peter thanked him with more gratitude than the boy had ever yet felt in all his life. It was a small thing to do for the man who had been serving him ever since he was born, but I suspect there is nothing a man can be so grateful for as that to which he has the most right. There was a change upon Curdie, and father and mother felt there must be something to account for it, and therefore were pretty sure he had something to tell them. For when a child's heart is all right, it is not likely he will want to keep anything from his parents. But the story of the evening was too solemn for Curdie to come out with all at once. He must wait till they had had their porridge, and the affairs of this world were over for the day. But when they were seated on the grassy bank of the brook, that went so sweetly blundering over the great stones of its rocky channel, for the whole meadow lay on the top of a huge rock, then he felt that the right hour had come for sharing with them the wonderful things that had come to him. He was perhaps No, not he. It was perhaps the loveliest of all hours in the year. The summer was young and soft, and this was the warmest evening they had yet had, dusky, dark even below, while above the stars were bright and large and sharp in the blackest blue sky. The night came close about them, clasping them in one universal arm of love, and although it neither spoke nor smiled, seemed all eye and ear, seemed to see and hear, and know everything they said and did. It is a way the night has sometimes, and there is a reason for it. The only sound was that of the brook, for there was no wind and no trees for it to make its music upon, if there had been, for the cottage was high up on the mountain, on a great shoulder of stone, where trees would not grow. There, to the accompaniment of the water as it hurried down to the valley and the sea, talking busily of 1,000 true things which it could not understand, Curdie told his tale, outside and in, to his father and mother. What a world had slipped in between the mouth of the mine and his mother's cottage! Neither of them said a word until he had ended. "Now, what am I to make of it, mother? It's so strange," she said, and stopped. "It's easy enough to see what Curdie has got to make of it, isn't it, Peter?" said the good woman, turning her face towards all she could see of her husband's. "It seems so to me," answered Peter, with a smile which only the knight saw, but his wife felt in the tone of his words. They were the happiest couple in that country because they always understood each other, and that was because they always meant the same thing, and that was because they always loved what was fair and true and right better, not than anything else, but than everything else put together. "Then will you tell Curdie?" said she. "You can talk best, Joan," said he. "You tell him and I will listen, and learn how to say what I think," he added, laughing. "I," said Curdie, "don't know what to think." "It does not matter so much," said his mother. "If only you know what to make of a thing, you'll know soon enough what to think of it. Now I needn't tell you, surely, Curdie, what you've got to do with this?" "I suppose you mean, mother," answered Curdie, that I must do as the old lady told me." "That is what I mean. What else could it be? Am I not right, Peter?" "Quite right, Joan," answered Peter, "so far as my judgment goes. It is a very strange story, but you see the question is not about believing it, for Curdie knows what came to him. And you remember, Curdie," said his mother, "that when the princess took you up that tower once before and there talked to her great-great-grandmother, you came home quite angry with her and said there was nothing in the place but an old tub, a heap of straw. Oh, I remember your inventory quite well, an old tub, a heap of straw, a withered apple, and a sunbeam. According to your eyes, that was all there was in the great old musty garret. But now you have had a glimpse of the old princess herself." "Yes, mother, I did see her. Or if I didn't," said Curdie very thoughtfully, then began again. "The hardest thing to believe, though I saw it with my own eyes, was when the thin, filmy creature that seemed almost to float about in the moonlight, like a bit of silver paper they put over pictures, or like a handkerchief made of spider threads, took my hand and rose up. She was taller and stronger than you, mother, ever so much, at least she looked so." "And most certainly was so, Curdie. if she looked so, said Mrs. Peterson. Well, I confess, returned her son, that one thing, if there were no other, would make me doubt whether I was not dreaming after all, for as wide awake as I fancy myself to be. Of course, answered his mother, it is not for me to say whether you were dreaming or not, if you are doubtful of it yourself, but it doesn't make me think I am dreaming, when in the summer I hold in my hand the bunch of sweet peas that make my heart glad with their colour and scent, and remember the dry, withered-looking little thing I dibbled into the hole in the same spot in the spring. I only think how wonderful and lovely it all is. It seems just as full of reason as it is of wonder. How it is done I can't tell, only there it is. And there is this in it too, Curdie, of which you would not be so ready to think, that when you come home to your father and mother, and they find you behaving more like a dear good son than you have behaved for a long time, they at least are not likely to think you were only dreaming. Still, said Curdie, looking a little shamed, I might have dreamed my duty. Then dream often, my son, for there must be more truth in your dreams than in your waking thoughts. But however any of these things may be, this one point remains certain. There can be no harm in doing as she told you, and indeed, until you are sure there is no such person, you are bound to do it. For you promised. It seems to me, said his father, that if a lady comes to you in a dream, Curdie, and tells you not to talk about her when you wake, the least you can do is hold your tongue. True, father. Yes, mother, I'll do it, said Curdie. Then they went to bed, and sleep, which is the night of the soul, next took them in its arms and made them well. And I'm going to stop there, because the next chapter is chapter 5, which is called The Miners. So there you go. That's a lot of words and a slightly odd feel to it. I wonder where this story's going to go. Very interesting. Have you been drawing any pictures of your times listening to the stories, or when you've been thinking about the stories afterwards? If you have, please come and share them over on our Discord server. And I am going to share the illustrations from the stories that we've been having as well. Just because there are so many different ways that people imagine things, it's lovely to share them. So we shall see you next time. And in the meantime, if you're wanting stories to listen to, go on over to my YouTube channel, which is linked below, and have a listen to some other stories there. And I look forward to meeting you again next time and reading you some more stories. Bye!